Państwu przyjemnej podróży.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our panel discussion. Just to say that this discussion will be held in English. So if you need translation outside, you can get your translation set. My name is Kristof Kleemann, and I am the director of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom based in Israel, Jerusalem. And I have the pleasure of moderating today's session that is addressing a topic that I think is one of the main challenges that liberal democracies face today, namely the rise of polarization and extremism. And our panel today will try to address these questions, looking at it from different countries and different country settings. And we have seen populist movements around Western democracies that oftentimes try to present an appealing alternative, promising simple fixes to very complex questions. And we have seen in certain countries, once they are in power, they systematically weaken the checks and balances that are essential for a functioning democracy. And we have seen this playbook being played out everywhere where populist parties have been able to come to power. And this leads to very difficult discussions. In my home country, Germany, we have currently a debate about how to strengthen the constitutional court in the light of the success of the populist AfD party, the right-wing party in Germany. And in the country where I live, in Israel, before October, the tragic event of October 7th, we have had, or we still have, a right-wing government that tried to alter the judicial system and thus weaken the checks and balances. I think and we have over the course of this weekend already discussed populism, we have discussed the challenges that it posed to liberal democracy in various panels. And I think our panel today is an excellent addition to it because it brings together four distinguished speakers from four very different backgrounds and countries. And with that, we hope to learn from the experience of different countries and to see where similarities and differences lie and how liberals can try to find answers. So I'm happy to be joined by Disa Jironet, who is a Swedish-Dutch citizen living in the Netherlands. She has been working for the prosecutor's office in the Netherlands since 2009, and she is also she's currently working on a very interesting book on the relationship of the individual with state institutions, and I think we will come to that during the discussion. I'd like to welcome Persico, who came all the way from Israel, despite all the different difficulties that we have now to fly. So I'm glad that Thomas could make it. Persico is a research fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem, a Rubenstein Fellow at the Reichman University in Tel Aviv, and a senior research scholar at Berkeley for Middle Eastern Studies. And he has also written books, essays on the topic of liberalism, on the relationship of state and religion, and I'm glad that you have been able to join us. I'd like to welcome Hubert Czyżewski. Excuse my pronunciation of the name. He heads the Warsaw office of the Aspen Institute and is responsible for Central Europe. And he is an intellectual historian specializing in the relationship also between religion and politics in the modern world. And last but not least, Mr. Bálint Magyar from Hungary, who is currently a senior researcher at the Central European University based in Budapest. Mr. Bálint was previously a member of the Hungarian parliament and also twice a minister for the Hungarian Liberal Party. So I would like to start to maybe just shed light on the state of polarization, the state of extremism in the different countries that we have represented here today. And maybe I would like to start with the country that is furthest away. Toma, maybe you can address a little bit, what is the state in Israel as regards to polarization, extremism? What are the challenges that the country has faced over the course of the last years? And of course, also during the times of war.
Thank you, Kristof. Well, let's begin, of course, before the war, which already posed, the situation posed a very big challenge to Israel. You mentioned it a little bit about how the current government tried to orchestrate a judicial overhaul, basically neutralizing the Supreme Court in Israel. And I think we have to understand that from all the mechanisms that people have engineered in order to keep the liberal order protected, Israel has only one. Only the Supreme Court protects the rights of individual Israeli citizens, and actually also of non-citizens, right? We don't have a constitution, we don't have two houses of parliament, we don't have a federal system, we don't have a Bill of Rights, we don't have any of these, there's no veto by the president, nothing like that. And what the government tried to do is neuter the Supreme Court in order basically to allow itself to do whatever it wanted, to legislate any law that it wanted, really with the eyes towards the occupied territories, towards Judea and Samaria, towards some sort of annexation with which the Supreme Court will not be able to interfere when rights will or will not be granted to whoever is in the annexed territories. I think this was the major goal. And actually what we saw in Israel before the war is a great civic awakening, which even surprised me as an Israeli liberal. An amazing show of force by hundreds of thousands of Israeli citizens marching out into the streets every week for 10 months straight. I think perhaps this is unprecedented in terms of relation to the population. We are only 9-point-something million people, million citizens. So that was quite reassuring, though of course the war has erupted and these things are pushed back into the background. But I will say to close, Israel basically has two extremist threats. One is the populism that I just talked about, but the other is religious fundamentalism, religious extremism, coming, of course, from the Islamic side, mainly from non-Israeli citizens, the Hamas, Hezbollah, etc., but also Jewish extremism, Jewish fundamentalism, which I would say is perhaps 5% of the population, no more. But these people who believe in making Israel into a theocracy, into a Jewish halachic state, what we call a Jewish theocracy ruled by halakha, by the Jewish traditional law. They are not, again, more than 5% of the population, but now they hold power because Netanyahu appointed ministers from these groups. Our internal security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, is such a person. Smotrich, our finance minister, is a fundamentalist. And so Israel is at very big risk right now from these people.
Thank you. Disa, maybe you want to comment on the developments in the Netherlands.
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction, Kristof, and also for sharing your ideas already. So I think most of you in here, when you think of the Netherlands, you will think of a liberal country. I think you will think of a country that is both culturally liberal when it comes to values and what is allowed culturally and what is not allowed, and also politically liberal in the way of running the country and the openness of business. And it's a very it has this culture and tradition of being a trading country and very facilitating in that way. And what I've witnessed is that it has become, under the previous parliament, so when we had the Prime Minister Rutte, who is now head of NATO, that it became more and more value-less. So it's a country that wasn't so much driven by values, but by pragmatism. And there was an important transition that took place around 2017, where we instilled something called the participation society. So where more and more responsibility was placed with individual citizens. Everyone has a possibility or the responsibility to take care of their own life, which in effect actually just meant the hollowing out of many of the social systems and the weakening of the institutions. And in that sort of vacuum of ideals and vacuum of values, there was more and more space for the far-right parties like the Dutch PVV or the Forum for Democracy to fill that vacuum with their far-right ideology. And those ideologies, as you must, similar to many other sort of more populist and far-right parties, consist of fear of migrants, fear of the elite, and sort of filling that vacuum in that way. And what I think we saw was, and this is something that has taken place in the more recent years, the last 2-3 years, is that the liberal answer to this filling of that vacuum of values with these far-right values was to mimic that value. So rather than pose an alternative or come with a strong new sense of values, there was this idea that we had to hear these sentiments in society, that only the far right were able to voice those adequately. And so our liberal party, the VVD, started mimicking this way of speaking and this kind of rhetoric. And I think all that really done was to normalize this way of speaking, creating slowly more and more room for this populist and far right sentiment. And this has fed the polarization between groups in society even further. And in the end, the VVD has made this far-right government that we have now, they've made that possible by forming a coalition with Geert Wilders' PVV, so with this far-right party. So this, I think, is the general sort of background, or I think I think everyone in the Netherlands would more or less agree that this is the trajectory that it's taken. And so what I see of this in my work, so I'm not a politician, I'm a criminal prosecutor, and my main job is that of prosecuting discrimination in the Netherlands. So every part of the Netherlands, a prosecutor has their task, it's a sort of task of discrimination, but so we do the national work. And on hate speech, on hate crimes and group insult. And basically what we do is we delineate the outer borders of freedom of speech. We'll get into that more later. But I think for now I just want to say that we prosecute anyone who sort of crosses over that border. So that can be, a far-right, extremist, that can be demonstrators that cross the line, and that can also be politicians that cross that line of freedom of speech. We have that sort of controlling task as a prosecution in Netherlands. And what we notice is that the discourse seems to be taking place more and more along the edges of that freedom of speech, on the far outer borders of it. And our task is then to uphold the legislation and the European rules along those lines.
Bálint, may I ask you also to comment on the state in Hungary at the moment? I mean, you probably have, unfortunately, the longest experience with authoritarian rule since 2010, basically. But how does it play out at the moment? And maybe also you can delve a bit in the research that you have done. What are the institutional setups that would have been needed in order to maybe avoid what has happened in Hungary?
Thank you very much for the opportunity being here. Yes, really, we Hungarians can boast with the most developed autocracy in the European Union, a unique position, I would say. As the topic is the polarization, polarization as a negative category can be used in democracies, because polarization is just one of the tools when a certain political actor challenges liberal democracy and the legal rational legitimacy of democratic regimes. And the autocratization process has practically three phases: the autocratic attempt, autocratic breakthrough, and the autocratic consolidation. When we were worrying about the status of democracy in Poland, we could witness it is still during Kaczynski's within the phase of the autocratic attempt, because the autocratic breakthrough means when a single political actor can create the monopoly of political power for themselves or for their own party. It happened in Hungary in 2010, and there are two institutional things which made it very possible. One is that we had a very disproportionate election system, which made it possible that after a political, economic and moral collapse of the socialist liberal governments in 2008, 2009 and 10, the Fidesz could seize 53% of the votes on the elections, but with this 53% they gained 67% of the seats in the parliament, so they became able to change the constitution and all laws, of course, among them the electoral law by alone, without any consensus and any negotiation with other rival political parties. And at the same time, they could appoint the heads and staff of the institutions which should serve as checks and balances, courts, constitutional courts, state attorney's office, state account office, etc., tax office, and so on and so on. So this was the moment of the autocratic breakthrough. This is what did not happen in Poland, because they did not have the monopoly of political power. They did not have constitutional power, the peace at that time. Now, after seizing this power, came the so-called, what we call, patronalization of the whole society, and this is where we have to make some differences between different autocratic attempts. Because in Poland, the autocratic attempt was characterized by two basic motives. One is concentration of political power and ideological indoctrination. It was an ideology-led regime, very roughly, I would say. In Hungary, it's just the opposite. It was not an ideology-driven regime, what happened to evolve, but an ideology-applying one, which meant that the ideological panels, what the Orbán regime uses, has no value coherence, but it has a functionality coherence. So therefore, these panels, from a value coherence point of view, they contradict to each other. The two basic motives of this regime in Hungary, on one hand, of course, concentration of political power, and on the other hand, accumulation of personal wealth. Because the structure of the ruling elite in Hungary is like an extended patriarchal family, a political economic clan, which grasps the power and accumulates personal and family wealth for this political economic clan. This is what I call, from sociological point of view, adopted political family, and it results that the decisions are taken out from formal institutions, not as in other type of autocracies, which are bureaucratic or conservative autocracies, and where the decisions are made, they are mainly informal bodies, I would say, which consist of people with formal and informal positions. We should call them as the chief patron's court, which exercises power, and the patronalization of the society means that they abolish the formalized normative structure of dependencies within the society, and they substitute it with patron-client relations, which has a lot of forms concerning what is that field, what they want to conquer. Such a way, if we want to make a difference between, let us say, the Polish autocratic attempt and the Hungarian one, that in the case of Poland, Kaczynski was an autocrat, but not a criminal. It's a huge difference, because the stake of the elections for him and for the PiS was whether they lose the power or not, whether they will be in power or in opposition, but not in jail. In the case of Hungary and some others, post-communist mafia states, what I call this, and within the EU, Hungary is the only one which deserves this name, but beyond the EU, Russia and other Central Asian post-communist countries are similar post-communist mafia states. The stake of the elections is, if they lose the power, they not simply lose their formal positions as politicians, but they will be subjects of jurisdictional process, so they can even go to jail, and therefore the stake of elections is absolutely different in such a kind of autocracy, what we have in Hungary.
Thank you very much. Hubert, do you agree with that assessment, that comparison? I mean, we always as liberals, of course, look at Poland as a very positive example where we were able to kind of overturn an autocratic or a regime that was going into the direction of autocracy. How do you see Poland today, and do you agree with what Bálint just said?
I think, and thank you, Kristof, and thank you very much for the chance to be here, but it might be the case that Kaczynski himself is a very prudent person in these terms of corruption, but his whole entourage and the network around the ruling party might not be the case. So I guess, and I hope that at least some of these people will end up in jail at some point. However, what I wanted to say is, when you ask about the roots of the whole process over the last 10, 15 years of growing polarization and development of extremist populist policies, I think one of the crucial cases in Poland, and this might be an interesting lesson for other countries, is that to a great extent, this started with the first Tusk's government, since 2007, which, when they prided themselves to pursue non-ideological policies, post-political government, very pragmatic, building bridges, building roads, neglecting at the same time this whole cultural identity sphere of the political community, which has been successfully accommodated by Kaczynski, by right-wing Law and Justice to a great extent. And this has been accelerated on a very personal level in 2010, when there was this most unfortunate Smolensk airplane crash, when Lech Kaczynski, so the Jarosław Kaczyński's brother, died together with 95 other people. So this political division, political discourse has become radicalized and personalized to a great extent. But on the other hand, when PiS won in 2015, their campaign, their agenda was, again, to some extent, but positive, right? They promised to extend the welfare state. They promised to accommodate and take care of this cultural identity sphere I've been talking about before.
Okay, thank you. So basically, we heard some similarities here that in countries where ideology have become less and less important, that gave also rise to those kind of populist movements, and that try to kind of exploit that void that existed in societies. Thomas, maybe I can ask you, because also yesterday we had a panel on how to make liberalism sexy again. And the question was, why have liberals found it so difficult to maybe present the liberal idea in the 21st century in a new way? You have written a book about the history of liberalism. How can liberals or how are they able to maybe present a new story that speaks to people, and then at the same time can counter those kind of extremist tendencies and populist tendencies in our societies?
Thank you, Kristof. Yes, I want to focus on a word that you said and a word that you said. You said identity, that they neglected identity, and Kristof, you said story. I think these are very important words. And as you said, we were yesterday at the panel about how to make liberalism sexy, and people said we need to give answers to people, we need to address their real problems, we need to explain what exactly we are doing. Sometimes people don't understand. But I really can't understand how these are solutions to our problems. Does Trump explain what they do? Do they address people's problems? Of course not. Of course not. That's not why they are popular. What they do is they tell a story. What they do is they give a promise to protect their constituency's identity. Orban says to his constituency, I will protect your Hungarian or Magyar identity. I will protect it from the elites and from the European Union and from the cosmopolites or the globalists and from George Soros and whatever, right? Also Bibi Netanyahu in my own country. That's what he says. I will protect your Jewish identity. Of course, your Jewish lives, security and everything, but also your traditional Jewish identity from the academics that want to dilute it, from the liberals that want to dilute it, etc., etc. This is the thing. And if the government, as you said, a professional government, doesn't deal at all with identity, somebody will come along to fill that vacuum. Somebody will come along and say, you are worried about whether your children will be like you or not, whether your children will be able to be proud Polish or Hungarian or whatever. We will secure their identity. And that's also, and this also goes against the usual critique or understanding of populism as ascending on the background of the breakdown of the welfare state. If that was true, I'm not saying there's no connection between material problems and conditions and politics. There is always a connection, right? But this connection is not first and foremost the only thing. If it were so, we wouldn't have populist movements in Scandinavian countries, right? I mean, what's a better welfare state than Sweden or Finland or Denmark? And they all have rising populist parties. Why? Not although they are so liberal, but because they are so liberal. And here I want to say one final thing about liberalism. If there is a problem with liberalism, I mean, I'm a liberal, don't get me wrong. Liberalism doesn't tell a story. Liberalism is a fantastic arrangement for a lot of people who are individuals and very diverse to live together and actually to accumulate imaginary amounts of material wealth. Unbelievable, right? It's a great system, it's a great arrangement, but people don't want to be part of an arrangement. People want to be part of a story. People want to be part of something bigger than them that tells them where they are going to. And now liberalism can't give that. It can't, because if liberalism says, oh, we're all going to a socialist heaven or fascist organic nation or whatever, whatever sort of utopia that you'll concoct, that's not liberalism anymore, right? So here I think is the problem, and I think what we must do is, even though we cannot tell such a story, we should never neglect the legitimate concerns of people about their identity and about the story, their collective story.
Can I add
Yeah, please.
Sorry, I think it's such a valuable contribution. I think that this is also this hugely important way of thinking, that we understand that people we don't fight for our material well-being anymore. We fight for our culture and our identity. That's what we're prepared to, stand up and die for. So I think that's really important and one word I would like to add to your identity and story is emotion. I think that this is, I'd like to refer to Martha Nussbaum, who really aptly says, that emotion has been taken by the right, and we assume that the emotion is something that belongs to the right. And often the liberal answer is rationale, calm, non-emotion. But we are all emotional beings. We interact with the world, with each other through our emotions. So the liberal side needs to have an emotional answer, an emotional response. So I'm a prosecutor. I sit in court and I wear a toga and I uphold the law. But every case that comes in the courtroom is messy. It's all emotion. And if I can't deal with those cases adequately if I only uphold the law and I don't engage with it. So as an officer of the government, as an exponent of my government, I need to be emotionally available in those situations in order to have any effect at all. And this is something that I see in the real, actual interactions between government and citizens on a day-to-day basis in the hundreds of cases that I deal with. But I think that this kind of awareness needs to land also on a policymaker level, on a directorate level, where you understand that the policies you make, the ideals that you forward, they have to have an emotional response in people, because that's what people are by nature, emotional beings.
Thank you. I think that also showcases the importance of empathy and compassion, and that I think we liberals sometimes lack when dealing with citizens. I was wondering, Hubert, looking at the Polish case, how important were, I mean, we heard just also from Israel, you know, the rise of the civil society against the reform plans of Netanyahu, of the overhaul of the judicial system. How important were civil society organizations and also the role of individuals to kind of make this comeback of the current government?
Absolutely crucial, very important. You know, there's been ongoing actions and developments of various civil society organizations, both sectoral, lawyers, doctors, you know, but also NGOs working in these soft areas, building communal trust, democracy, and so on. However, I think that one maybe important distinction, the difference maybe between the Polish case or the German case or the Hungarian case is that, you know, historically, it's, if I may say, quote unquote, in the DNA of Polish society and state, is that Poland will never have a truly strong government. It's far more difficult to introduce an autocratic government for historical reasons, because of the tradition of, you know, the first Commonwealth, and there's even an anecdotal quote by Stalin that you know, trying to introduce proper socialism in Poland will be like putting a saddle on a cow. Poland's unfit for this kind of social engineering things. So on the one hand, this is difficult because policies are always to a great effect ineffective. Even good policies, even with good governments have good ideas, they tend to try to introduce them. They're to some extent ineffective because people have a very strong sense of individual independence, and very often they prefer to organize you know, grassroots level movements. And probably the best example of that is the reaction of the society, both on this organizational level and individual level, right after the full-scale invasion of Russia into Ukraine, where you know the waves of millions of Ukrainian refugees came to Poland, to various cities, and the whole process logistically, I think it's fair to say, went well, very well. But was absolutely bottom-up initiatives, nothing coordinated by the states, right? So to some extent, I think we may say that Polish society is somehow vaccinated against this, you know, full-blown autocratic regime, but which also has some, you know, disadvantages of this particular feature.
Unfortunately, I have to reflect for a few things. The first is the case of corruption, because in such debates I am accustomed to that my partners say, oh, we have also terrible corruption in our country, but the corruption has three levels practically. The ordinary corruption, the second is the so-called state capture, when criminal organizations or oligarchs capturing some parts of the state, and the third level is the criminal state, when the governance is operated totally as a criminal organization. And it did not happen in Poland. And just that you could imagine, it's not simply kleptocracy, because kleptocracy is a criminal thing, but a peaceful one, and concentrating on revenues, incomes, what they diverge to private pockets. But in a criminal state, it's a predatory state, when with the help of state coercion, they deprive owners from their property by state coercion and put it into the frame of the so-called adopted political family to the clients. I think in Poland you cannot have such a story that a guy who was just a gas fitter 15 years ago, gas fitter, having few 10,000 euros wealth, now he is the most he is the richest person in Hungary, having more than 1 billion euros wealth, but other estimates between 2 and 3 billion euros, who is just a classmate from the countryside of Viktor Orban, and this son-in-law of Orban, having now close to between half billion and 1 billion wealth, who was a nobody, he has nothing until he did not marry the daughter of Orban and other clients, you know, so it's not the case. And how is it going? And it's absolutely a different thing. This is why I say that Poland was an attempt for a conservative bureaucratic autocracy, where of course there can be corrupt cases or something like that, but just very shortly an example of which is a typically. Pardon?
So not systematic in the way.
Not only that systematic, because even corruption can be endemic, but not systematic in that sense, that not hierarchical, and that the mafia chief in such a country is not the prime minister himself. You know, he's not the prime minister himself. For example, when they wanted to deprive a Spanish-Hungarian company already in 14 or around 13, 14 from he had concession in Budapest to hang out posters on the lampposts of Budapest, and the guy, the owner, was invited to the Ministry of Economy, and the minister told him to sell his company to one of the oligarchs of Orban, one of close. He denied. Few weeks later, came the tax office harassing them, the chief attorney's office harassing. He still refused this offer. Then the parliament, the Fidesz caucus, brought a law which deprived him from this concession, saying that it's dangerous to hanging out posters on the lampposts because it endangers the drivers on the roads, but not any other devices which belong to the Fidesz at that time. And then a few years later, he changed his mind. He sold to this company to a given oligarch of Fidesz, close to Orban, and then a month later, the parliament abolished this law. It means that the whole governance is operated as a criminal organization, and it's a unique case. I don't want to boast with this, but this is the situation in Hungary. The other thing, what I would mention, of course, liberals are concentrating on processes and regulations and all these things that's needed identity, but it's not enough. It does not explain what happened in Hungary, because why did not happen this in Romania or Bulgaria or some other countries.
That information that is out there into kind of understandable sound bites to the public. How do you see the role of these kind of institutions, universities and the media, in order to kind of counter this trend that we see in liberal democracies? Thomas, you want to jump in on that?
You're talking, of course, about Yuval Noah Harari and his new book, Nexus. So, yeah, he poses the basic dichotomy of truth and order when we talk about information. Information is not only given to us in order to know the truth, but really most of the time information brings order into different areas of our lives. So if we read the first chapter of Genesis, the Bible, right, we understand something about how the world works, of course, before the scientific revolution. The last half of that book is devoted to a warning from AI, which we won't get into here, right? He by the way, also gives a lot of importance to the stories we tell. But when we talk about the institutions, really, I think a major part of the problem with the attack by populists is that truth no longer has the meaning that it had. Facts no longer have the meaning that they had, right? And we can see it all over, right? It doesn't really matter what I said 2 months ago. I can say something completely different now. Doesn't matter what the economy data shows. I can still be a brilliant economist, etc. Really, facts don't matter anymore. Hypocrisy doesn't matter, right? And I think this is the most important challenge that we must face. How to emphasize, how to underline truth again, how to get truth to be sexy again, how to get truth to be important again. And I think it's a challenge I don't have an easy answer for. But I think that is what we need to emphasize. Harari, in that book itself, differentiates between the scientific method and religious mythology by one thing. He said that the scientific method, it's also stories, right? It's a story about the earth revolving around the sun and not the sun revolving around the earth. But what the scientific method has is a self-correcting mechanism, which the Bible doesn't have, right? The Bible is just what it is, and you can interpret it ad infinitum, and that's it. What was special about the scientific process is that self-correcting mechanism, and eventually I think we in our societies will have to organize again some sort of self-correcting mechanism and some sort of renewed respect for the truth, because obviously democracy and perhaps any free society cannot work when there's no agreement about the very facts that we are talking about, the discourse that we are having around these facts.
You want to come in then?
Yeah, sure. So I think this is a very critical and also quite philosophical way of looking at the sort of predicament that we're in. I'd like to join or sort of what Tomar says and sort of connect that to what Bálint was saying about that there's a difference between, yes, you need identities and stories, but you have to see, where the money's going, which is absolutely true. But I think what Bálint is part of what you're saying is that that is manipulation. So manipulation versus a story about identity. But that kind of manipulation where the money is going to advertising, when you're giving funds to people right before the election, that is also a way of creating a story. It's a manipulative story, but it's still a story. So to sort of understand that if you're looking through it at that lens, that you need to be critical of who is telling the story, who benefits from the story, who's missing from the story. And then if you see it from that lens, it becomes easier to discern what is truth and what isn't truth. And so for me personally, a very important tool is the rule of law, in that to sort of say this is outside the edge of what is tolerable to say, and this is what is tolerable. And maybe the law isn't going to help us to figure out what is true and what isn't true, but it does create a sort of agreement amongst us about which things we can say and which things we cannot say, simply because they are too harmful for us as a society in the way we function together.
Yes. I would like to use the category populism in a little bit narrower sense as it used to be in the mainstream literature. I do not consider, let us say, I consider populism as a legitimacy challenge. The real interest behind it, and within populist actions, I would separate the supply side and the demand side. But now, I do not consider just simply demagogue parties to be populist. For example, the Greek series and others, because I don't think that they challenge the institutional setting of liberal democracies. And at the same time, I do not consider populist parties the extremist parties, in that sense, Nazi parties, extra left-wing parties, who are, according to me, ideology-driven parties, and of course they challenge the legitimacy, but very openly. In populism, I consider such parties that populism is a kind of ideological instrument, not an ideology. So different ideological panels can be mixed in it for a political program. What I mentioned, legitimacy challenge, and then at the other side, for the morally not constrained collective egoism. Because when they try to create the populist leader a direct connection between him or her and the people, it means that they want to abolish the whole institutional set of public deliberation. And the set of public deliberation from the right of freedom of speech, freedom of association, election rights, parliament, division, separation of branches of power, etc., etc. These are nothing else than the institutional set where a society publicly debates and creates that what is the public good. What is considered to be public good? And of course, it's always compromises. And in a liberal democracies, you take into consideration the notion of minorities, etc., different interests. What is happening in a populist movement? That there is a leader, and he says that I'm directly tied to the people. I know what is the public good, but the real essence of that they blow up the whole system of national solidarity. This is the real promise. This is the promise of Trump. You don't have to feel solidarity to anybody who is not you. And I combine the nation. And when we try to explain with ideological panels, let us say they are telling that Hungary is an ethno-nationalist, no. In the traditional sense, Orban is not nationalist. His nationalism is not targeted against Slovakians, Romanians, anybody else. His nationalism is targeted against those Hungarians who do not belong to that patron-client network which belongs to him. He's directed against these people. So his nationalism is not a nationalism in a 19th century sense. When they say that he's Christian, not at all. Not at all. He doesn't mind if Christian Armenians are pushed out from Azerbaijan. You know, he does not mind when Catholic churches are blown up in China, etc. No, Christianity for him is nothing else that to extract certain topics from the possibility of public discussion. When he builds a new football stadium and he opens it, then he says that thanks to God we have this football stadium. And if you thank it to God, then you cannot raise the question whether it had any sense to build such a stadium or not from public money. And when he's speaking about family, is nothing else than a traditionalist form of a patriarchal family. And that form, as he exercises power, he does not govern in Hungary constrained by laws and formal regulations. He disposes over properties, over persons, positions, etc., like in a patriarchal family. So that model is just how put as a model for ruling a country as a whole. So populism for me it means this practically, just abolishing all moral obligations to anybody else than you are, and it is strong, so strong, because all these people can unite together, not taking care for others openly. This is Trump's ideology, and this is what behind the. But let us say in a extra left-wing pro-communist ideology, it's another thing. It's, according to me as a sociologist, I say it's not populist. Even a Nazi ideology is also it's another extreme, a very bad thing, of course, but it's not what I mean, that it should be populist ideology.
Yeah, no comment if you want, and then we open to questions to the audience.
Right. So if this round of question is more on this meta level of theory, I would like to make one historical argument. I think to a great extent, the story of our European Western non-polarized politics in the post-war period, 1940s, 1950s, the foundation for that Christian democratic, social democratic consensus was the threat of communism, was the threat of Soviet Union, and in order to face this challenge, the center adapted a lot of radical left agenda. Right? That's how we establish welfare state, progressive taxation, so on and so forth. So perhaps this is my provocative thesis. This story may happen again if the moderate mainstream parties adapt, recycle in a wiser way some of the agenda of the extreme politics. Extreme politics is the result of polarization, but also maybe the cure for the polarization, right? In the 50s, in the 60s, France, Italy, they've had proper communist party, which won 20-25% of votes every election. But they were kept at bay, right? By the centrist, Christian, social democratic consensus. And if we're talking about, some reasonable, practical political strategies for the next 10, 20 years, this is what I think will be most suitable.
Thank you. I would like to open the floor to the audience. I think we have time for 2 or 3 questions. So if you have a question, please raise your hand, and I think we'll take like 2 or 3 questions in a row, and then we answer them in one go.
Igor Kulawczyk, University of Łódź. I have a question to our Hungarian guest. So what are the examples of polarization in Hungary before the authoritarian regime was introduced? Like what was the axis of polarization in your country?
Maybe just to collect the... Are there any other questions from the audience? There's one... Sven.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Very much appreciated your comments. I have a question on the regards to social trust. We see in all liberal democratic societies social trust eroding over the last 50 or 60 years, and maybe the harsh truth for liberals is to recognize that the liberal democracy might play a role in all of that. So the question to you is maybe provocative. Does democracy necessarily lead to polarization? And if so, how we can deal with that inevitable fact to a certain degree? Because even in liberal democracies we see erosion of social trust.
Thank you. Okay. Bálint, you want to come on the first question? And then...
In 2002, when after the first cycling government of Orbán in Hungary lost the elections, he immediately next day told that the nation cannot be in opposition. This is a polarization. He says that they are the nation, and those who won the elections, they do not belong to the nation. But of course, when there is a challenge against liberal democracy, polarization is a bad thing, because as we were speaking about this, it tries to put in brackets the whole institutional set of public deliberation. But once you have an autocracy in a country, then you need polarization. Otherwise, you cannot overthrow an autocracy. Of course, you say that you are autocrats, you are dictators, and we do not want this. And of course, this was the problem after 2010 and 11 of the Hungarian opposition, that they could not choose and decide themselves what kind of paradigm to follow, a government critic paradigm or a regime critic paradigm. Because in the case of a government critic paradigm, it assumes that in basic values we agree with each other, with those who are in government, but there are certain problems in public policy issues, etc., in which we have debates with each other. In a regime critic paradigm, you deny that there are any values what you share with those who are in power. This is the regime critic paradigm, and therefore you question the legitimacy of the regime openly. The problem is, in the case of populism, that populism does not question the legitimacy of the regime openly. It just plays the game that it's democracy, but it's the democracy of the people, or it's in Russia sovereign democracy, in Hungary illiberal democracy, as Orbán told, etc., etc. So it questions the legitimacy of the regime hiddenly. When you have an autocracy, then there is nothing else, and this is the situation now in Hungary. You have to openly question the legitimacy of the regime. And this is what did not happen until now. Just this new formation with the Disa party, with Peter Magyar, who is not a relative of mine, just the same name we have, but he has the position, and those who are following him, to question the legitimacy of the regime.
Come on.
I want to address the second question, and I want to maybe complement what I said before. Again, I'm a liberal, and I want liberalism to flourish, but I think we must see also the weaknesses of liberalism. And one of the weaknesses is that it is concentrated very much on the individual. Liberalism is a form of a framework to protect the individual's rights, right? And in that, it sometimes neglects the community, it sometimes neglects the nation. I will say even more than that. Liberalism understands freedom as autonomy. We are protected in different dimensions of our lives to act autonomously, speech, religion, property, etc. When this is the main message of a framework, things that oppose our autonomy like perhaps the things that I was born into, perhaps the religion I was born into, the ethnicity I was born into, even the gender I was born into, or the sex I was born into. These sometimes pose as if an obstacle to my freedom. I want to choose everything that I want to do in my life, okay? Again, I'm for autonomy and I'm for freedom, but we need to understand that this sends a certain message to society. And so again, if I go back to what I said about the need for a story, liberalism alone is a fantastic framework to manage a big society that is made up of diverse individuals. But it needs a complementary side. It needs something that will give a cohesive, cumulative identity to the people. It can be nationalism, it can be some religious tradition. It needs a story, sense of belonging to something bigger to complement it. And this, I think, is what today is missing, that after 30 years of basically complete victory of liberalism, at least in the West, since the fall of the Soviet bloc, the other assets that we had that gave us these cumulative stories diluted in time, and now I think this is we're experiencing the results of this.
Okay, I think we have to come to an end, or you want to add very quickly, Disa?
Yeah, I think I can do that in 1 minute and 17 seconds. So just the last point, just to sort of complement what Tamer was saying, so I think the fundamental principle of how we live together is that we trade some of our freedom for security. That is the basis of the contract we have together. And I think the question that sort of surrounds what we're asking for is, what kind of security are we looking for? What does it look like to be safe and secure in this day and age? And is that a freedom from conflict, or does it involve something much more deeper and fundamental that will bring a more sense of fulfillment to our lives? And I think finding an answer to what that kind of security looks like might bring us closer to having an answer to that kind of populism we're facing.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we could have discussed much longer. Thank you very much for the excellent contributions from the panel. Thank you for the audience for coming. And I wish you a pleasant day and very much a lot of interesting discussions upcoming. Thank you so much.
Kanapki z kawiorem.
Nadzwyczajna kasa.
Obrażanie dziennikarzy telewizji polskiej.
Chodzi o działania polityczne.
Przygotowanie ofiar dla pedofilów.
Für Deutschland.
TVP Info. Włącz się na nowo.
Radość, nadzieja, życie, wyzwanie, pasja, pamięć, zaufanie, pokój, jedność. Słowa tworzą świat. Polskie Radio. Źródło wiarygodnych informacji.
Plany biznesowe powstają z marzeń. Dlatego nie ma dwóch takich samych firm. Jedni chcą działać na całym świecie. Innym cały świat mieści się w dłoni. Sukces biznesu to nie tylko jego wielkość, ale też szczęście, jakie przynosi ludziom. PKO Bank Polski.
Uwielbiam szycie w sieci. Wczoraj podszyłem się pod wnuczka, wieczorem uszyłem intrygę na apce randkowej, a dziś planuję grubymi nićmi szyte oszustwo z promocją. Tak się szyje.
Na oszustów są sposoby. Zapoznaj się z poradami ekspertów na niedajsiepodszyć.pl.
It's not always easy to recognize. It may look like this, or like this. It may be a burden, but it is a responsibility that we embrace nonetheless. But if it means this for one person and this for someone else, maybe it ultimately means being there for one another. It isn't handed to us, but we know where to find it and how it feels. how it tastes, and what it sounds like when we finally have it. It means different things to different people, but for many, it means everything. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together.
Polskie Radio.
Jedynka.
Rodzina spółek Pelion to 12 000 osób pracujących w ponad 300 spółkach w Polsce, Szwecji, Wielkiej Brytanii i na Litwie. Jesteśmy liderem w branży ochrony zdrowia. Od 1990 roku dbamy o długość i jakość życia. Pracować z nami możesz w jednym z 7 obszarów.
Zapraszamy do Trójki. Od nowa.
Trójka. Program Trzeci Polskiego Radia.
Czy wytrzymasz klockowe tortury ze stoickim spokojem? Czy w twardych negocjacjach Zachowasz zimną krew? Czy poddasz się dobrowolnej eksmisji ze swojego łóżka? Brawo! Test na obecność serca zaliczony. To znaczy, że ty też możesz być rodzicem zastępczym. Dowiedz się jak na testserca.pl.